Learning and Teaching in Endemic, organized by Anista Cultural Uruguay and supported by Red Hood in Mexico. We also come with the remarkable collaboration of Lucia Bonilla and Maria Eugenia in the simultaneous interpretation into English. We're very honored with their presence. All of this material in English will be available for our colleagues,
van a participar en
for
otras
our
instancias.
English-speaking colleagues.
Estamos muy honrados con los tres integrantes
We are very honored with the three members of this panel who are here with us today: Javier Echeverría from Spain, Yolanda Campos from Mexico, Marta Mena from Argentina, and Oscar Pedrozo from Uruguay. You already have their biographies in the podcast material, but we're going to introduce each of them in their presentations. This panel aims to exchange visions, experiences, ideas about the context of endemics and its interrelations with education, particularly in the areas of teaching, learning, and research. What could be the educational keys to deal with this situation today? Well, this panel with four experts from Spain, Mexico, Argentina, and Uruguay will help to discuss the proposed topic, offer possible answers, and above all, generate questions that encourage in you, in the audience, a healthy and sustainable critical spirit for future educational transformation. Before we begin, we will share a brief definitions of some of the main terminology.
Simplemente terminologías vinculadas a lo que ustedes ya conocen, pero que viene bien en torno a lo que serían, bueno, los
It's terminology related to things you already are familiarized with, but that should be helpful for today. It's related to outbreak,
lo que sería la
epidemic,
en un lugar y determinado momento de la enfermedad.
in a given moment and place, the pandemics that involves more than one continent and generate cases by its own, and syndemia, which is the sum of two or more epidemics or outbreaks, and chronic behavior in one or more continents.
La terminología de sindemia, que sería cuando, a su vez, a la pandemia se le agregan otras problemáticas correlacionadas que
also pandemics, which involve two criteria that affects more than one continent. I'm sure that you have already seen or heard about one or more of these terminologies. So this should give a framework for our discussion today.
Una introducción a esto. Bueno, muy bien. Ahora sí, después de esta especie de gran paneo, vamos a empezar justamente con la presentación.
We will begin with the introduction of our first panelist.
Bueno, le agradecemos porque a su vez está
we thank him. He is
para
traveling
la conferencia y a su vez
on his way to a conference.
compartiendo la posibilidad con nosotros aquí en este panel.
So it's great to have the chance to have him here today. He's Javier Echeverría. He's a philosopher and mathematician. He holds a PhD in philosophy from the Universidad Complutense de Madrid and a PhD in human sciences from the University Sorbonne de Paris. He's a researcher for the Basque Science Foundation and a university professor on leave of absence. He's also a university professor from the Institute of Philosophy of the CSIC, and his main fields of research have been the philosophy of science and technology, the ethics of science, and the study of the relationship between science, technology, and communication technology. Since 2006, He's dedicated to the study of innovation, and he has published several books in recent years that include El Telepolis, amongst others. Javier Esponda is a member of the International Academy of Philosophy. He's received several awards in the humanities and social sciences. So we welcome him. Please go ahead with your 15-minute presentation for each of the panelists, and then we'll have some other interaction. So please go ahead. Thank you so much for this invitation. It's my pleasure to be here with you from somewhere where I don't live. I am in the south of Spain right now in Malaga. So I'm in a hotel room. Well, lining, as you can see, it's not really great, but that's the reason why. So this is a very important topic, endemic and education. We have learned a lot in the last year and a half since the outbreak first started from anywhere in the world, but let's think about China, although some other outbreaks in parallel also seem to have started. But until it turned into an epidemic, the epidemic reached Spain very soon. And then the World Health Organization, after the pandemic, they said this virus will spread through the whole world, as it has actually happened, with the exception of some small rural places. But in the urban um, centers, it's been the main site of spreading of the virus. And in the interconnections, we can see this. For instance, to airports. So cities have been the big centers of spreading of the disease. So people, because we carry the virus with us. So we translate the virus. I have traveled in Spain right now from Bilbao to Malaga. And well, who knows how many viruses there were there on that flight that were infected. In any case, I'm already vaccinated, but I could have uh, spread the virus myself. I'm well aware of that. So inadvertently, you can carry the virus even if you don't um, have any signs of the disease. And that is very something to think about. But that would be a great learning um, curve for us to be aware that we can uh, carry viruses, diseases, without being aware of it, without having symptoms of a disease. It's a very important learning about being more responsible than we have been until now. Stop and think that, well, there could be a pandemic, but if it doesn't affect me, then I don't care. You may not be affected by the virus, but still be a spreader of the disease. And so this poses a huge challenge that has to do with solidarity. It's not only health, but a solidarity aspect within health. So whether you have the virus or not, you need to be contemplative of others. So in my time with you today, I would like to discuss two things. First place, the pandemics, the jump from disease to pandemics. It's declared by the WHO, which depends on the UN. And we need to remember that the UN is behind the World Health Organization, but there are also many major um, biopharmacological enterprises behind all of these decisions, and we need to be well aware of that. So, in any case, they declare the pandemic um, with a delay, in many people's opinions, but the pandemic was declared, and at that point, particularly in Spain, where I have spent the pandemic myself, because I was one of the people who hosted. I'd like to say the virus in my body. So it was a conflicted relationship. I'm not gonna say I became a friend with the virus, but we did learn to um, co-live. So at the beginning of April, I had already hosted the virus. And I was looking for the right word. It was very drastic at that point. I said we need to learn to live with the virus, and the president, Pedro Sanchez, and also the president of the community of Euskadi and of the community of Catalonia, all of the major politics, they were saying we need to fight the virus, we need to defeat it, using the metaphor of war. Um, but the virus is part of nature. It's the outbreak is random, as is typical of viruses. I mean, viruses are are previous, way previous organisms to humans. And so, in any case, it was a random outbreak, their nature, and we are their guests in a way. So, bacteria and viruses, they they're part of the origin of nature, of the atmosphere. And so, we need to respect them. We need to respect microorganisms, virus, disease, bacteria. And so, I strongly think this. So, from the philosophical perspective, ontological perspective, I think that we need to co-live with this virus as we do with other viruses, with other bacteria, with other microorganisms. I could not right now digest my food if I wasn't processing the food with the help of the organisms in my intestine. So my philosophical ontological message has been from the beginning of all of it to live with the virus. So the evolution of the pandemic, the main learning curve that we've had globally is that we need to co-live in this planet with the virus. And we also need to deal with other problems in the planet, with climate change, but we're not paying any attention to the micro customs caused by viruses, microorganisms. We need to pay attention to them, whether they are beneficial or not for us. This COVID, well, there are many bacteria, there are many microorganisms that are hugely beneficial to us. And so we don't try to enter into a war against them. Um, we need to understand with which we can live with which we cannot. I understand that this is for me, this is globally the main thing to learn. And I think we should translate this into the educational system. It- when we talk about what these years have meant with respect to COVID-19, and in the next years, if this will continue, well, it will decrease or it will get worse, but we need to discuss about this. Back then, I already said that this was an endemic virus because the spread had been um, so fast, it won't just go away. It's part of its nature. This virus does not mean hard. We
demonizar
cannot
lo que
demonize
les
it.
hace
It's
daño.
not. It doesn't have something
Nuestro
against
propias
us.
personas. También es cierto
It's true
que
that
el virus
it
funciona
damages
de
us,
manera muy diferente en unos organismos o en otros.
but
Entonces,
also the
si
virus works.
tenemos
It's
unos
also true
contagios
that
de
the
100 o
virus
100
works
menores,
very
muy
differently
diferentes.
in
Pero
different
para ellos, para los
people.
jóvenes,
We're
pues
having
eso
right
es
now in
un mal
Spain many
pasajero.
cases of
Y por lo
infections,
tanto, pues dicen,
serious
¿por qué
infections
vamos
in young
a
people, for
recluirnos
instance.
nosotros si nuestro organismo por sí mismo se defiende del virus? Tenemos un mal día, dos malos días,
But
y
well,
uno tiene
we
una
may be
enfermedad
having
grave
a
hace muy poco.
bad
Por
day.
ejemplo, para
Some
los
people have
escandinavos de
serious
España,
diseases, some others
murieron el
don't. But
35%
for
de los
older
muertos por
people,
ancianos en las residencias.
35% of the
Eso es
deceased
dramático. Eso no
people
está
are
funcionando bien.
elderly. So that is a dramatic
Eso también hay que
piece of
atenderlo.
information. We need
Efectivamente, en las
to also
residencias
take
de
all of
ancianos,
it into
estoy hablando de
consideration.
Europa, no
In
solo de
the old,
España,
in the
digamos,
nursing
hay un
homes,
montón de personas que son
um,
pensionistas y
there are
que parte
many
de su pensión son cuidados en residencias, porque ya
many
hay
people who
familias
receive
que les atienden, etcétera, pero
this
no les
kind of
ofrecen
care
cuidados.
in
Hay que
nursing
buscar,
homes
hay un sistema,
uh,
digamos, de
as
ayuda, de
part of their
cuidado a
social
personas ya
security
hasta la
system.
muerte, que está más o menos organizado, en su mayor parte
So
privatizado,
this social
y
security
aprendimos también
system is
que las
partly
residencias
privatized,
privadas eran un
takes care
negocio
of the
porque
elderly during
efectivamente
their
no
older
cuidaban
age,
ni en
and they didn't
absoluto, no tenían previsto
take good care, appropriate
una
care of
epidemia
these
en una de
people.
las
Well,
residencias
they
donde
didn't.
vivían. Y entonces hubo una mortandad tremenda,
They couldn't
absolutamente
foresee also the
escandalosa.
pandemic,
Por lo
but
tanto, las
the
políticas públicas
mortality
de salud
among this
para personas de edad en
population was
residencias, sean públicas o privadas,
huge.
eso es un aprendizaje
And this is something that we really need to
vital.
learn
No
from
digo
in
que se haya
Spain. We
hecho,
need to
pero creo
learn
que está
from
habiendo
it.
una reflexión muy importante al respecto. Y bien, y paso por
I think
último
there's been a
esta
huge reflection
intervención
about it.
a
And
mencionar
lastly,
la
I would like
sindemia, que en
to
realidad el
mention
tema
syndemic.
del que más me he ocupado es de la sindemia, en el
This is something
sentido
that I've thought
de que
about a lot.
si hay una pandemia o simplemente una epidemia en un
There is a
determinado país,
pandemic
pero si hay una pandemia a nivel
or
global,
an
eso
endemic
genera necesariamente hoy en día, dada la estructura de la
necessarily
sociedad, con sus redes
generates because
sociales,
of
con
how
los
the
medios de
society
comunicación,
works
con
today
Internet,
with social
digamos, esta
media,
pandemia que
internet.
estamos
Um,
hablando de la pandemia a través de Zoom, ¿no? Entonces, genera una
so
difusión de la noticia
this
excesiva
generates
por
a
las estadísticas
diffusion
de cada país, y entonces ha
of
habido
the
países
news,
que
of the
se han
characteristics of
fortalecido.
each
Nosotros no tenemos
country.
ventajas,
Some
hemos tenido muy
countries
buenas
were very
políticas.
proud
A los 3 meses
and
resulta que
letting
estaban
everyone know that we
fortalecidos
didn't
y
have
se tenían los peores
any spread
datos,
of
¿no?
the disease. And
Entonces,
3 months later,
ha
it
habido
turns out they had the worst
desarrollo
outcome. So
social o
there's been a
tecnosocial
social
del virus, o sea, una cosa es la
development of this virus.
epidemia y la pandemia, y otra cosa es la infodemia. Yo utilizo el
Because
término infodemia
infodemia is a very important
una de las especificaciones
term.
de la
It's
endemia
not the
es
pandemic or
no,
endemic, it's
la
the
endemia es más que la
infodemia.
infodemia, bien entendido. La endemia
The
son,
endemics is more than the
digamos,
infodemia.
consecuencias sistémicas que una
The
epidemia
endemics are
genera en
systemic
las sociedades, y
consequences
hay muchísimas.
due
Pero
to the
me he
pandemics.
centrado
And there are
último
many
sobre estas cuestiones en la infodemia, es decir,
in the
aprovechar
infodemics.
la información sobre el virus, la información sobre la
I've
epidemia,
really thought
las
centered
estadísticas,
my
y
work on
eso
how the
fundamentalmente
information
sobre
about the virus and
epidemias,
endemics
porque efectivamente
has
ha
been
habido el
dealt
fenómeno
with.
del
And there is also a
negacionismo, que
lot
es muy
to learn
bonito.
here. There's
Yo
been the
no voy a
phenomena
insistir en ello porque, hombre, yo estoy en
of
contra del
negating
negacionismo.
the
Por
disease.
supuesto que yo he padecido el virus y por lo tanto
I
tengo
mean, I'm not
conciencia
even gonna
y
discuss it.
estoy vacunado,
I
pero
have hosted the
yo soy
virus. I'm
negacionista.
vaccinated,
Pero eso
so
no quiere decir
evidently I don't
que no entienda
deny the disease. But I
la
do
ciencia
understand
contemporánea, la
that
ciencia de la
the
salud, fabrican
technoscience
noticias y a veces
of
fabrican
today,
incluso
well, it
virus
does
ficticios, porque las
construct
amenazas a la sociedad, las
fake
amenazas
virus
a los
as well
pacientes,
as
las amenazas a las
information
personas,
because the threats
digamos,
to people
son
to
efectivas, o sea, son efectivas
because the
en
threats to
tanto
people
acciones
to patients
telemáticas.
they
Bien,
are
yendo,
effective
dando un paso más
with respect
respecto a
to
la infodemia y dejando,
technoscience,
insisto,
but without
las falsas noticias, las fake news, que las ha
talking
habido,
about
las hay y las
infodemics,
seguirá habiendo,
besides from
sobre el
fake
virus
news,
y
which is
sobre
a
cualquier
fact
otro tema. Es decir,
on,
en las
on the
actuales
virus
sociedades
or on
telemáticas con
anything else.
Internet y con las redes sociales, forma parte
Today
la
with
mentira y las
social
falsas
media,
verdades,
fake news,
forman parte de nuestro
lying, it's
panorama
just a
cotidiano.
part
Pues
of
sobre el
our
virus
everyday
también.
life.
Sobre el virus se han
Um,
generado una
and
gran
so the same has
cantidad de
happened with the
mentiras y
virus.
una gran cantidad de
Having
falsedades,
many
pero
lies
vienen
and
desde las administraciones, incluso
also
de la
from
propia
the government, or even from the WHO. This is something I wanted to highlight so that you don't think that I only mean the people that deny the virus. There's also people who ascertain the existence of this virus, but some of them have managed the information in a clearly biased way to answer to the interest of certain pharmaceuticals, for instance. Um, I have published an appendix to my book, Tecnopersonas, about this. So, about the fact that whoever wins this battle will become the lord of the virus. And so this is something known. Right now, there are many vaccines available. We have the Occidentals one in the South, in Latin America. Many of you have had the Chinese vaccines. We have AstraZeneca. In Spain, we don't have the industrial capacity to make vaccines, but right now there is a huge competence to make vaccines, to generate um, knowledge that enables us to produce vaccines. So this huge competence is part of the science of today. The competition, the geostrategic competition for the vaccines between China, Russia, Cuba, and other countries to generate their vaccines. Um, so the structure of power, at least in Europe, is that Pfizer and Moderna, also with AstraZeneca, they have been the most frequent vaccines. So there has been a huge propaganda for one or the other, with very powerful struggles between the pharmaceuticals. And that is not science, that is techno science. And I am all for scientists who have generated this new vaccine technology. This is a huge scientific advancement. I am for them receiving the Nobel Prize. They're receiving the prize Asturias in Spain, and I am in favor of these women and men um, being awarded for what they've done. So, but when we discuss about the industrial generation and the marketing strategies of this vaccine to see which is best, which is worse, that is the technoscience. So this is something that I really wanted to mention today. The technoscientific system that is meant to heal people. It has a good aim, but it enters this gruesome competition because it's a huge business. Pfizer and all of the rest, they have they have made huge amounts of money, just like Zoom, where we are today. It's also one of the beneficiaries of infodemia because we're all confined at home. We have learned to talk online, to have transatlantic forums among different countries, no matter the languages. And so we've learned to relate not only interpersonally, but telematically. So I use the example of Zoom. I have nothing against it. It's just, but what I mean is that aside from the competition for different vaccines, there's also been a competition for software that allows to educate online. And this is something that also deserves our attention. So here I only wanted to pinpoint some of these big aspects, and then based on your interest, I will gladly read.
Thank you, Javier from Spain, for this first round, sharing and generating an exchange. As you can see, we are working with keywords that the speakers have shared before for you to get an idea of what they're going to talk about. I'm going to introduce our second speaker today, Professor Marta Mena. She's in Buenos Aires in Argentina. She's going to say a small profile. She's director of the virtual training program for researchers, ProForvin, at the Secretariat of Science, Technology and Graduate Studies at the National Technological University, known as UTN, since 2012. She's the director of the master's degree in university teaching at the Universidad Tecnológica Nacional. She's also a doctorate and master's degree teacher at the Universidad Nacional de 3 de Febrero in Argentina. She's a postgraduate teaching at the National University of San Luis in Argentina, and she was a pedagogical secretary at the Faculty of Economic Sciences of the University of Buenos Aires. There, she created the distance program for undergraduate students and the continuing education program for university professors. She was a consultant for the World Bank and directed the electronic training program for the virtual training of public officials in Argentina and neighboring countries. She taught in the Master in Educational Technology at the University of Salamanca, Spain, for 17 years, 1989 to 2007. She was director and teacher of the master's degree in distance education at the University of Morón. She was the vice president for Latin America and the Caribbean
Distance Education y es miembro de su comité ejecutivo.
Education and member of its executive committee. She's also an associate researcher for Contact North in Ontario, Canada, on virtuality and distance education. She has written countless articles, book chapters, and books on distance education in the Latin American region. Marta, thank you very much for being with us. Javier has given you a good cue for the questions on distance education. She's a world referent on this, so thank you. Go ahead. Thank you, Delma. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the presentation. It's an honor for me to be able to exchange with these speakers. I have met Yolanda, and it's an honor to be able to interact with her here. And of course, Javier. I have started my knowledge on information society with some of his books, so it's an honor to be here. I'm going to center not only on vaccines and pandemic that has been magnificently introduced by Javier, but no, I'm going to focus on education, how it is to learn and teach, and what the pandemic has meant for learning and teaching. But to clarify first, just to give a little context, I'm going to talk about some things that I use a lot. The scenery in which I work is the university, so my references are going to be centered on this institution. When I speak of virtuality, I am going to mean a very broad reality that we're experiencing today in all our superior education institutions, and as a result of the installation of the Information and Knowledge Society and the installation, of course, of the pandemic in the last years. This includes the slow metamorphosis of the classroom and the programs that are being developed online 100%. This is compromised. This is included in the concept of compromise that I'm talking about. I'm also going to mention the labyrinth, the concept of labyrinth. People that know me know that I use this metaphor in different senses. It's inspired in the literature of Borges, Jorge Luis Borges, the Argentinian writer, who uses the labyrinth as a symbol and who shows, in my opinion, something fascinating that should be explored. And he sees it as chaos, a place to get lost, but he also sees it as an established order, or order of the universe, etc. And it's very special for us to speak about the labyrinth and learning and teaching during the pandemic. The arrival of COVID-19, its arrival in the whole planet, threw us all into the labyrinth and makes us ask ourselves how and when. That's the question that you hear and that you make. How and when will we be able to get out of this labyrinth? It has meant, and it still means, for most of us, a great wound and a great pain for all humanity. However, and in this Borgian sense, this labyrinth is also being a great learning opportunity. Javier talked about this a bit in the beginning. It's an incredible opportunity to learn and to make visible things that were hidden and that we didn't give much attention to. We refused to see. Aventura de Sousa Santos has written a book this pandemic times, and it's called the cruel pedagogy of the virus. He takes the virus as a metaphor, and he says that the virus came to teach us, to show us realities that we couldn't see or that we didn't want to see. So, helped by this idea of closure that the labyrinth gives us, and helped as the metaphor of the teaching virus that Pedrozo Santos gives us, we can identify some situations or realities that we have lived in these 15 months that we've been going through this. We can find some signals, be the right path to resolve or work out the problems that were before, those that we didn't want to see, and also realities that were brought by the pandemic, and that will help us get out of the labyrinth. That's the idea. This crisis, this health crisis that showed other less visible crises, affected all institutions in society, and got us into a very uncertain situation. The path that we have traveled in this year and a half, aside from bringing us to the labyrinth, also showed us a very interesting metamorphosis of the status of the virtual way of teaching. It had to step up and be the most important part of teaching for a long time, and all the world. And this new role replaced face-to-face teaching in many places. This situation was a great surprise, not only in society, but also in educational institutions and in teaching. So what I'm going to do is a quick analysis of the situation, general situation lived in these labyrinthic stages that education has traveled through. I'm first going to talk about an overlook of society. I think we all know the surprise and commotion, the first moments of the pandemic generated in us, and the proposal of the different degrees of confinement that we had to do. That surprise lasted for a while, but towards the end of 2020, we could in the society and educational stages and institutions, we could see a bigger acceptance attitude towards virtuality towards the end of the year. Maybe because we thought that summer was coming, so the experience was ending. So maybe we thought that after holidays, this could be over. 2021 did not bring that about. It started with an intensification of the discussion in all society about the need to cancel face-to-face encounters. So the institutions were not closed. Education is not over, but face-to-face was turned off. It's still being discussed. Presentiality versus virtuality. So these discussions were made from different points of view. For example, from a health point of view, we talk about safe presentiality. Presentiality can function when health conditions allow it. So what are the conditions that the places and etc. have to have so that presentiality can be begin again? From that point of view, is that. But from the values in society, the deep
forma posible y aceptable de enseñar y de aprender.
That is seen as the only way in which we can learn. And from the political point of view, the fight there is who was going to keep the credit for the defense of education. That's what happened politically. This is a quick overview in some on some social things. On the start of virtuality as a way of learning. How was this lived within the institutions? This is interesting to analyze. Universities everywhere, when they entered the Labyrinth, were hurt in its more appreciated area, which is the face-to-face bond between teacher and student. That happened when buildings were closed and when it was decided to start virtuality. So institutions, once the initial shock wore off, universities in generally speaking, have reacted in the way they could. It has been very varied and very difficult. For example, some didn't want to at first, or were very surprised. And finally, when they couldn't do anymore, elaborating contingency plans that had a solution to make sure every student, the right to every student to learn was protected. So institutions act as a guarantee of rights. So in this time, during the pandemic, within educational institutions, they had to sail, to put another metaphor, in very troubled waters that virtuality posed. And that fight to be sure to give the right to educate, but without really the conviction and decision of assume a change of dimension that was what was really required at that time. We were entering a new world and a new stage. So the explanation is that universities have had traditionally difficulty to make changes. A colleague that works in Spain, Carlos Escolari, has summarized this wonderfully. I'm going to read what he said, what he wrote. so as to not. 4 million people had to get the disease, and 250,000 die for the university to really think about use digital technology. University is a rocky educational interface that can only be transformed by external inputs. He exemplifies with the process of Bologna that modified European universities and the arrival of COVID-19. Carlos Escolari is showing this attitude of universities that are kind of slow to produce the changes that are needed. So contingency plans that were elaborated by different educational institutions, establishing this virtual link between students and teachers, have tried at every step to compatibilize the preservation of health with the continuity of teaching. So when this was happening in that rocky interface that he talks about, some groups, teachers or directors started working online, and they started doing a very unthought about experience in those spaces that were built for analysis. Virtuality that at the beginning was something strange, it was something that they didn't know. They were used to work in other ways. It was resisted at first. It gradually started to be embraced and discovered in a lot of its dimensions, and especially its affinity with the characteristics of the society we are living in. It's structured in a certain way in the networks, so it helps. I think that what's significant of this experience is that groups that still work today are considering the pandemic as a great way to test virtuality. It allows them to evaluate this way of teaching, and they're doing it not only locally, but through networks. They can do exchanges regionally or globally. A lot of these initiatives, we were able to know them through famous webinars that have been done throughout the pandemic, and where people share experiences and we can discuss things. So within the university, that's about it. But within the teaching community, this process of introspection and conversion and change that we have seen had a lot of tension. It has to be said, it was very difficult, and especially in the teaching community. Those were the ones that had to interpret and configure the main aspects that were going to be key to the new model that we had to develop. So it's logical that in that process, a lot of tension was lived. For example, because we were including new functions or theoretical frameworks that teachers didn't know, or that confronted the ideas that teachers had before naturally. So generally, there was just some harmony in the place where teachers could accept that the stages were changed, the world was different. So they realized that those new stages were necessary to act calmly within them and to be able to teach in those stages. So those stages, some of them were uncomfortable. For example, the unheard of horizons in the education. So they were thrown into a stage that maybe they didn't know. Also, the permanent visibility of their actions. It's very public what happens in virtuality. So this public visibility erased the intimacy of the actual classroom in which the teacher worked. It was him or her and the students before. So other than these questions, there was the myth of the inverted symmetry of the native digital user, this thing that we had to use technology and had to teach young people that supposedly knew much more than teachers, was really a turning point that was very intimidating for teachers. This myth started to be overcome when we discovered that young people use it differently. They use it for games and communications, but when it's about building knowledge, they need the guidance of teachers. I think that all these
actuando directamente en el terreno, ya en el escenario, con el telón levantado,
in this new stage have generated the idea that virtuality has been very uncomfortable, and they have lived this in that way. So for the end, I want to talk about the vulnerable populations in regards to virtuality. So the experience also showed that students are very unequal, and there's very vulnerable students that don't have the adequate electronic devices, and connectivity is very poor, or maybe it doesn't exist in this situation. Shows that it's very difficult to establish a virtual learning environment. We know that it has been difficult, and there has been many solutions proposed, and they have depended on the authorities, on the regions. And also it depended of the creativity of teachers as well. So I think governments have a very important part here within what means the technological means and the economical means that is necessary for take these populations out of the vulnerability, especially within pandemic.
Muchas gracias, Marta, por tu participación en esta primera ronda.
Thank you, Marta, for your participation in this first round. We'll continue. Let's introduce our third panelist, Professor and Oscar Pedrozo. He is a member of the Central Board of Directors, known as COICEN. He was elected by the teaching board in the national administration, within the National Administration of Public Education in Uruguay, the main organism regulating the education of teachers here in our country. Oscar Pedrozo is a teacher. He graduated from the Instituto de Formación Docente from Tacuarembó, and he's a professor of civic education, law, and sociology, graduated from the Instituto de Artigas in Montevideo. He also holds a diploma in management of educational institutions, a postgraduate degree from the Instituto Nivel Devoto, particularly in the curriculum design and development granted by the Catholic University of Uruguay. And he has worked as a primary school teacher and secondary school teacher, also in technical education and in the institutes that train teachers and in the semi-virtual format since 1991. He was also an inspector, a departmental inspector for the teacher training in Uruguay. Thank you so much, Oscar, for agreeing to be here today. It's a great interaction between the panelists so far because Marta was discussing the role of government from a formal aspect in this pandemic context. So I think it's great um, the conversation possibilities that have appeared today. Well, good day to everyone. Just like Martha is discussing that her development from the university work, in my case, it is from the previous step. So everything that has to do with primary, secondary, middle education, and tertiary education at UTU, in the Board of Technical Education in Uruguay, as well as the training of teachers in our country, which is also a non-university degree, although there are some relations and coordinations with it. So today in my role, which is a governmental role, is that how the teachers have decided, what the teachers have decided, and this is how the coordination body that we have at the level of education on this context. So from my place there of responsibility, I want to present what we've been discussing and developing. I I share, I fully share what Javier was discussing as endemics. I think it's a very appropriate term. Um, as far as it really vinculates very well what a pandemic that generates a lot of elements from the economical, sociological perspective that takes us to, on the educational level, to think of whether it is a dichotomy, as some people have suggested, within education, or whether it's got to do with the complementarity related to face versus virtual education. So as teachers, we have um, a lot of knowledge when it comes to face-to-face education, but we didn't have much experience on virtual learning besides some very specific um, activities. Some other of the elements that I would like to discuss is the concept of different learning context and the ideas that we have about how we learn and what we learn, all of this in a process, in a framework of a process, because this pandemic context throughout 2020, it generated a series of um, situations and processes that we needed to go through, and where we were able to reach some goals, but still it's a work in progress because it's a very distant reality to the one that we were used to until March 13, 2020. Another aspect that we will be working in has to do with innovation, and this innovation has to do mainly with the particular experiences that we have developed at the level of the systems, as well as the teaching experiences that each teacher has carried on individually in different ways, particularly within the use of educational platforms and virtual platforms. We have several thousand students in primary, middle, and secondary school,
confluye una
and the teachers' training level. When it comes to the number of students, they're mostly concentrated on primary and secondary education, 92,000 students in preschool, and between 100 and 200,000 students in primary education, 167,000 students in secondary education, and 32,000 students who are training to become teachers, who have mainly studied in the virtual space, particularly these last students I mentioned. So for carrying out our governing roles in education, we have had to go through many different scenarios. We have had to change many things, but since March 2020, there were several scenarios of work that were set forth so that we could continue to work. So in March 14, we already knew what the context would be in terms of virtual learning. We wanted to keep the bond with the students. That was very important for us. But a few days later, we realized that it was not only the social relationship that we needed to keep with the students. But that was not the only thing important. Many other aspects also were established as very important aspects that we needed to care. One was to keep the bond between student and student. Another one was to
que
generate
pudieran
articulated
empezarse o
solutions
trabajarse desde la
so that we
virtualidad,
could
por ejemplo,
start
uno de los
working
elementos
in this
a
virtual
establecer
form. And one of the
conexiones
elements was
con
to
los canales
establish
públicos de
connections
manera
with
a
public
desarrollar
organisms
lo
so
que
that
venía transitándose
we would be able
y
to
aquellos
develop
aspectos que se iniciaran
programs
fuertemente
that were already in
donde
place
hubiese una enseñanza, un trabajo
so
de
that
los docentes, pero un trabajo también coordinado a nivel
education and coordination of the Plan Stable Plan and the teachers
educativas
could
que
continue its way,
llegaran al país entero y un diseñar estrategias para atender al
and to
futuro
design
a
strategies
un posible reinicio de clases.
thinking
Posteriormente,
in
abril,
a potential
se
restart
desarrollan
of
avisos y
the
guías orientadoras
face-to-face
para
classes.
docentes y comunidades educativas
So
ante
many
emergencias
plans
sanitarias.
were
Se forma un
put
grupo
into place.
en el cual
There was a health emergency group that was put together to help coordinate, to help analyze, discuss all of the emergency plans. And on June 25, we were thinking about the challenges of the face-to-face education strategies to teachers, and that group who was working on this aspect was also gathering some experiences that teachers were going through, particularly communal teachers, teachers that had specific plans so that students would would still be engaged.
ese grupo que se había
So this
conformado
group, this
a
coordination
fines de
group,
marzo
formed
del
at the
20
end of
y que
March
tuvo
2020, is
un
still together
esfuerzo
today.
de reinserción
It was very
y
important for the
revinculación, de
reinsertion,
retorno a la
for
presencialidad,
the coming back
evaluación
to
del año
face-to-face
y
education, to
planificar
evaluate
el
the
próximo
learning year, and to
2021.
coordinate
En el 2021 una serie de documentos se
2021.
plantearon como
In this year,
la expresión
2021, there
de
were a
uso
series of
orientación
documents
sobre los aspectos
proposed
socioemocionales y psicoafectivos,
regarding
documentos donde
social
se validó
aspects,
ese
emotional
impacto y
aspects
también se
that the
hizo
pandemic had on the
una
students.
construcción en la cual
And
el docente
there was
entienda
also
que
a planning
su trabajo no es
so that the
desde la
teacher
virtualidad o
understand
desde la
that
baja
their work is
distancia
not from
únicamente en el
virtuality.
desarrollo de los
It's not
contenidos
only
y
in
aprendizajes
developing
adecuados a las orientaciones, sino que
the
también
unit
pudiéramos
content
atender los aspectos
depending on the subject.
socioemocionales y
We
psicoafectivos,
also, as
tanto de
teachers,
los
needed
estudiantes
to
como de los
pay
funcionarios.
attention to the
Una serie de
social,
documentos técnicos que con el
emotional
tema
aspects.
de las inspecciones
A series of
y
technical
pautas
documents from each
que
of
se
the
llevan
inspections
adelante por
were
parte de
developed,
los
also guidelines
directores e inspectores
that the
que
directors and
pudieran
inspectors put
desarrollar a la
together
creación
so
de
that
un acercamiento y una
teachers were able
continuidad,
to
porque
develop
ya
a
para este
proximity with
2021
students, an
entendimos,
engagement
y
with
eso fue
students.
un aprendizaje importante,
There was
que
an
esta
important learning
situación
curve, and we understood
bimodalidad
from the
o
beginning of 2021
de
that this
continuo híbrido en cuanto a la
hybrid
pedagogía tenía que
formality,
estar
we have
presente y es algo
face-to-face,
que
have
llegó
virtual.
para quedarse o vino para
It's
que
something that's here to
entendamos a que de esa
stay,
manera también se
or
puede enseñar
maybe it's
y
not
se
here to
puede
stay, but this is
aprender.
also a chance for us
Todos
to
aspectos
teach
que
and for
se
the students
estuvieron
to learn.
vinculando aquí en estos documentos
Um,
fue
with
fuertemente
regards to the
esa idea
aspects that these
centralizadores de los aprendizajes,
documents managed,
pero
it was
consideramos que los
very,
vínculos
the
del
key things
aprendizaje, del
had to do
conocimiento
with the
y
learning
de la
content, but
enseñanza,
always
pero
considering
esos vínculos trasladados
the social
desde
emotional aspects.
aspectos que hacen a los contenidos, a las competencias, a las emociones, en
So
marcos también de contextualización de los nuevos espacios
the new
del
spaces
mundo
created by the virtual
y en
spaces were
función
not
de los
forgotten
recursos que
in
pudieran
in these
habilitar
guidelines.
a los distintos retornos o las distintas
Um,
formas de poder
always
seguir
when
aprendiendo.
we thought about the
Digamos
return
que
to
el INED, un instituto de
from the virtual
evaluación
lessons, this was
externo,
considered.
una serie
From
de
the INED, we had
fuentes
a series
que
of
surgen a
observations
partir de la evaluación
um,
que se realiza en el
from
INED,
the
donde
observation
encontramos que
of the
los
document,
vínculos
where
que
we
se
saw
llevaron
that
adelante durante el 2020
the relationships
fundamentalmente
that were established
estuvieron
during
dados por
2020
las
were
plataformas educativas, las
fundamentally
plataformas a nivel
dependent
público,
on
que es el Plan Saibal,
educational
y las
platforms
plataformas
given
en acceso
by
a los institutos
the
públicos.
Ceibal
Asimismo, encontramos que un
platform
70%
and other
de
platforms
los
provided
docentes
by private
estuvo
education.
realizando su
Most of the students,
seguimiento del proceso
most of the
pedagógico
teachers
a través del sistema de
used
WhatsApp,
uh,
y en las instituciones
WhatsApp
privadas se dio una situación
for their educational
diferente y
strategies,
también se incluyó mucho lo que hace el correo electrónico.
and also
Con respecto
emailing
al uso de CREA, que es una de
gained
las
a
plataformas
strong
de Plan Ceibal,
role.
pudimos
CREA, which is one
detectar
of the platforms from
aquello que
San
nosotros
Ceibal,
teníamos con
we
un
were able to
promedio
detect
muy
that
mínimo, pero
while
de
we had a very
intensidad,
low
pero
average of
de
intense
uso para la
work, but
enseñanza
low
muy
usage,
básico, donde podíamos
or very
decir que cada
basic
estudiante se
usage,
había vinculado promedialmente en 6 días únicamente
where
en
we
el
can say that
2017
students in
con estas
2017
plataformas.
had
En 2020 nos encontramos con
used
que
an
los
average of
estudiantes
six
se
days, only 6 days,
conectaron
this
unos
platform.
62
But
días.
last
Eso
year,
también
the
nos
average was
da la pauta
62 days.
y la necesidad de
So this gives us the idea
invertir en plataformas,
that
de
we
poder
need to
llevar
continue
adelante
investing in platforms.
una
We need
acción
to
desde lo
carry
que hace a la
forth an
informática, pero
action
fundamentalmente de lo que
that has
hace
to do
a la
with
formación de
informatics,
docentes y que
that
pudiera
also involves
desarrollarse
the
en mejores
education of
condiciones todavía.
teachers
Hubo
that can
dificultades de
be improved.
conectividad, sí,
There were some
esas
challenges
dificultades
for
existen,
connectivity.
se dan
This is
mayormente en
something that is real for the most vulnerable context. It's a more prominent problem. We can clearly see this in which are the students that can actually um, have access to platforms. Uh, and from ANEP,
fueron
uh,
instancias
what was tried was to have collaborations with the public telephone company to have arrangements that could enable the less favored population sectors to have access to the platforms and to internet to have access to the platform. This year in 2021, in the CREA platform and in the video conferences through those platforms are absolutely free. So which allows the minimal connectivity so that all students can follow the virtual lessons. So, but many families have had problems with respect to connectivity. Also, the availability of um, devices uh, to connect. Plan Ceibal in Uruguay didn't use to uh, pay special attention to this population. So that whether by lending or by giving more devices, this population could be included. For instance, now um, the most minor problem was the use of devices by the kids. That was not an issue. And also the abilities were actually increased. Those abilities had to do with um, the use by each of the different actors involved. So Zoom was one of the platforms that had a huge increase in its use for education. It was one of the platforms most widely used for virtual learning. There were different actions such as the integration of learning time, established programs, um, organized by public television, with the co-organization by ANEP and Plan Ceibal, with works um, that had the students and families in mind, where the teacher or whoever is leading the programs, the educational programs, which is not always necessarily a teacher. So in these programs, there is this bond between the kid and the teacher, but there's always the inclusion of the families so that they can integrate these teaching resources for the help of of the kid. We've also worked in trying to find the needed collaboration from teachers. There is a wide philosophy of each one with its own, and we've, we've had to change because now each teacher from the different educational platforms, as well as official or non-official, they needed to show and to share the strategies that they're using to teach their children. So this really brings the community together at a national and even international level. So we need to show and share how we are teaching. How do we teach to add, to subtract, to write? all of the different areas,
la
artistic,
lengua, han tenido
language, mathematics.
profusión importante en el
They,
desarrollo de esa comunicación en cuanto a
there has been a
a
huge increase
de
in the
acuerdo a las fuentes,
communication
desde
of
los
how
distintos
they are
lugares,
being
como
taught.
decíamos, desde la televisión, desde
From the
lo
television,
que hace a los meetings, al Zoom, a
from the
conferencias,
Zoom
distintas
meetings,
propuestas que
conference
se vienen
meetings,
desarrollando y que se
all of these
van
different
consolidando.
plans
Esto es
that are being developed
genera
and
algunas
well
dificultades.
established.
Y
But
esas
it
dificultades
also
tienen
brings
que
some
ver con el
challenges.
ensanchamiento de las brechas educativas, de acuerdo
There's
a
been
las
a widening of the
distintas
educational
situaciones
gap, and that is
a
something
nivel
that is very, very worrisome.
del sistema. Por eso las acciones que se vienen desarrollando,
That's why the
muchas que
actions
deben
in
seguir
place and
adelante porque
many that
están
need to be
solucionando.
in place,
El rol de las familias
the role of the family
coeducador
as
real, en el cual
co-educator,
la familia tiene que
where the
estar
family
en
needs
comunicación
to
con su
be in
docente,
touch with the
con su
teacher,
institución,
with the
con
institution,
su hijo, a efectos
with
de
their
poder
children,
determinar cómo hacemos ese tránsito y cómo
in order
acompañamos
to
la trayectoria de cada uno de los estudiantes.
make this journey
Y
with
a
them,
nivel de
along
equipos,
them, and also the level of the
no
team, of the
funcionamiento de los
working.
mismos, una alta
There have been challenges where sometimes they haven't worked well. There has been
que se dan.
delays,
De todo esto
huge challenges from the
tenemos
technical
que
perspective.
fortalecer
From
nuestra
all of
mirada
this,
de
we need to
cuánto
strengthen
aprendimos como
our
docentes,
view of how much we have
de
learned
cuánto
as
aprendimos
teachers
como
and
sistema
how much we have
educativo,
learned
porque
as
también
an
tenemos que
educational system.
desafiarnos en ese sentido,
We also need to challenge
en el
ourselves in
sentido
that
de
respect,
la estructura general, porque esto nos está
in the sense of
habilitando
the general
muchísimo.
structure.
Nosotros
Um,
en el
this
contacto
gives us a
directo
lot of
con las
possibilities.
instituciones, vamos a
In
encontrar
the direct
distintas realidades y
communication with
propuestas en este
institutions,
sentido.
we find
Por ejemplo,
many different views and challenges in this sense.
se ha podido mejorar en algunos lugares
How have
muchísimo
we
lo que hace
been able to improve
a la
what,
educación para las personas de
what
mayor
has
edad,
to do with the
a
education of
esos contextos en
people,
los cuales nosotros tenemos como los liceos nocturnos, los liceos de extra edad y
of
la continuidad
older people,
de esas poblaciones, en
over
los
18
cuales
people.
en muchos lugares nos están dando niveles
In many places,
mejores de lo que nosotros teníamos hasta el 2019.
they have increased their teaching experience
No
compared to what we saw before. So what does this
se
mean? We need
está
to think about it.
realmente como una cultura pedagógica hacia los centros
Can we actually take in these learnings as a system, as a macro system,
si esa realidad, esos aprendizajes son
or does this reality and learning,
la vuelta a la presencialidad los olvidamos.
will
Ese
it
es
be
un
lost?
reto
Is it
que tenemos
superficial? Well, this
que
is a challenge
plantear
that we need to
sí.
think about.
¿Qué aprenden nuestros estudiantes?
What do our
¿Cómo
students
lo hacen?
learn? How do
¿Cómo
they
estos
learn it?
aprendizajes
How much of
permiten
these
acompañar
learnings
y permiten desarrollar trayectorias
can be
educativas
permanent,
cuando estamos
can help
limitando,
develop
limitándonos
permanent
por esta
teaching
situación?
strategies? How much are we limiting
¿Qué nos
ourselves
corresponde
by
sí,
this
en este
situation?
fortalecer
And,
el sistema educativo? Bueno, consolidar
and
esos
what can we do
aprendizajes,
to consolidate these learnings
y modalidades,
and these
fortalecer
modalities?
una cultura de educación
How
híbrida,
can we form an
tanto para los
hybrid
docentes como para los
learning
estudiantes,
culture
en todos los
for
niveles,
students and teachers at all
sabiendo
levels,
que los niveles
even though we know that
culturales, sociales y
cultural,
económicos desventajados
socio-economical levels
están siendo
with the most
perjudicados. Por
disadvantages
eso
are,
hay
well,
varias acciones que estamos
there are
tratando
big
para
inequalities in that sense.
también
We're trying to help
a los
them,
efectos
but also
saber que los grados menores, como es la educación inicial,
the younger
secundaria,
kids in
puede estar
primary and
viéndose
school and
limitada
preschool,
desde los
it could
aprendizajes y
be
también desde
being
la
limited
vivencia social.
from
Fortalecer
the
los
social
recursos,
perspective, not only
muchos
from the educational
docentes que
perspective. We
las
need to
escuelas
strengthen
tienen
the
abiertas
resources
pese
that have allowed
tener
schools to remain
cerrado
open
el centro
despite
educativo concreto,
having
pero sin embargo la educación
um,
sigue estando presente.
the
Ese
actual building
momento
closed.
de Marta de
The
apagón,
educational
de la
continues.
presencialidad,
Um,
es absolutamente compartido. Se apaga la presencialidad.
so the face-to-face is
se da una
by
continuidad y esa
at times
continuidad de la
it is
educación
shut off because of the
da
pandemic, but the
cumplimiento a esa
education
realidad
continues.
personal, con
And
identificación de la persona. Y
and in a
asimismo, también los
personal way.
aprendizajes de los estudiantes
And we also
tienen
need to
este
pay
modo
attention to
de
the learning
sincronía
process of
real
the
entre
students
las
to ensure
trayectorias que tenemos
their paths
que
to
asegurar
learning
que
and to
van
ensure
a
that
practicar.
we walk
Nosotros
with them.
tenemos que asegurar el derecho a la educación
We
de
need to
cada
ensure
uno de
the
nuestros
right
estudiantes,
to
porque
education of
ese
each of our
derecho que
students,
nosotros
because that
transitamos
right
desde la más tierna infancia, a los 3 años, en el
that
caso
starts in
de cada uno de nosotros,
at a very
tenemos
young
que
age, in our case,
realmente dar
3 years
las
old,
posibilidades de
it
un
really needs
desarrollo
to
de llegar
provide the
hasta el nivel
possibility
que
to
el estudiante
develop
pueda
to the level that
en
the
las
student
condiciones
is able
sociales
to,
así
wants
lo quieren.
to, and
En
that the
nuestro país
social
nosotros
conditions allows
establecemos
them to.
la obligatoriedad hasta la
In our
educación a nivel
country,
superior. O sea, ese es un
it's
compromiso
mandatory
de toda
to
la sociedad.
attend until secondary
Asegurar
education,
que
middle
realmente esos
education.
aprendizajes
So how
lleguen
can we
a
ensure
niveles
that
de tal
these
manera que el
learnings
estudiante
are
pueda transitarlo
validated so that
en
the student
los
can actually
distintos
go forth
contextos
with it in the
donde
different contexts,
asegurar su
and to
posibilidad
ensure
de
their possibilities
desarrollo personal, pero de
to
desarrollo
develop
también
personally,
académico,
but also
de
technologically,
desarrollo como trabajador, de su
as
desarrollo
workers,
como persona en todas sus
as
dimensiones.
people.
Por ahí estaríamos definiendo
So
que estamos transitando, lo que hemos venido desarrollando,
that's
desafíos
some of the main
concretos
aspects of the main things we have
que vamos
gone through in this
a tener
pandemic,
proyecciones
questions that we ask
inmediatas.
ourselves, and well, we can continue later with your questions.
Muchas gracias, Oscar Pedrozo, por compartir este
Thank you very
primer
much, Oscar, for
esta primera.
sharing this
Vamos a
first
pasar
round.
ahora a la maestra Yolanda Campos, que ya
Now we're going to have
hay saludos
teacher
muchos
Yolanda
en
Campos.
YouTube,
She has a lot of
por
greetings.
Facebook.
There's a lot of greetings in YouTube and Facebook
Así
for you,
que
Yolanda,
entendemos que hay como un
specifically.
movimiento ahí
So I understand there's a
por el lado de México. Muchos saludos
movement
de
in
diferentes
Mexico. There's a lot of greetings
mexicanos, así que
from
les
different teachers and
voy a presentar
Mexican
a Yolanda
teachers.
Campos.
So I'm going to introduce Yolanda Campos.
Casi
I
todos
think with this first sentence,
o todos suscribimos y
we agree.
Yolanda Campos se define
Yolanda defines herself as a teacher at heart.
su área de interés.
Her area of interest is educational innovation in the context of digital culture at all educational levels, from elementary to higher education, with an approach built from personal experience to impact consultancy in institutional, national, and international projects. She has lived, documented, and been part of the historical transformations of education in Mexico in accordance with the emerging technological innovations that have led to profound changes in education, from the Industrial Revolution 1.0 to 4.0 and towards the future of teacher training.
A su vez, Yolanda Campos, desde el punto de vista de su formación, es doctora en pedagogía.
She holds a doctorate in pedagogy, a master's degree in educational technology, a master's degree in educational mathematics, and is a secondary school teacher specializing in physics and chemistry, as well as a primary school teacher. For the South is just be a teacher, a primary school teacher. Her latest publications focus on the convergence of culture, education, and ICT in teacher education. We can recommend the Red Latte in Mexico publications, in which Yolanda Campos has works published. So go ahead, teacher. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation and being here with us. Thank you very much to all of you. Greetings to everyone participating from distance, and I give my respects and my thankfulness in these moments. That unique situation in which these speakers, I feel very I identify with them, and I also appreciate the organization of the event. Let me just tell you what I'm going to speak about. I'm going to start with contextualizing some of the premises which I consider evolution in education has been sustained. So the endemic that is permeated by technology and the 4.0 has a lot of challenges, and the teacher training is possible and gives a very bright future. And I'm going to start affirming some things that I have selected as premises that support the approach that I'm going to comment today. First, I'm trying to be very clear in the fact that education has been and will always be a key process for the survival and evolution of humanity. Human being is a product of evolution and learning, memory, intelligence, and consciousness that are built through education. So education as a process of actualization is tied to the evolutionary process with the production means, civilization, culture, and also a technology. And from the middle of the 16th century and in Europe and beginnings of the 20th century in Mexico with industrialization. These elements are not transformed in a homogeneous way. They cannot be separated from each other in just one historical moment. It's very important that we take into account that education is an integral process that has a way of relating to oneself and with others, with culture, with the environment and the universe or multiverse. So that point of view is expanded with the teaching and technology that are available. And it's mediated by beliefs, by profound beliefs, cosmovisions, and knowledge and conditions, environmental conditions. On the other hand, technology is understood as anything useful created by humans to extend life and evolve, has promoted the evolution of the human being. Human being in its evolution has created technology to satisfy his needs and transcendental capacity that characterize culture and education of each time. So individuals and societies have extended their understanding of that reality, unique reality, with the possibilities of satisfying their own basic needs of survival, expression, and connection, simultaneously with the development of their own capacities and their own abilities. And another premise in educational planning, the same questions that provoke interactions in the context of learning, who learns, how they learn, and how it's evaluated, repeats constantly in all our planning. So why do I comment this? Because from this vision is that I reflect upon an education that is evolving. What we're living right now in pandemic is the product of that education evolution that, together with the evolution of the universe, is going forward. In the cosmic calendar, the life and evolution of the human being are very recent. and the institutionalized education process is even more recent, and it's very short, its presence in history. The teacher teaching for work within the production regimes during the Industrial Revolution 1.0 to 3.0, there have been profound changes in all knowledge areas, in industry, in the way we handle information, and we broadcast knowledge. Most national projects that have tried to integrate technologies as a support for education in Latin America became what they were in the 1980. In Mexico, it started in 1984 with the first international symposium on computation computers and education. Those programs started a way of looking at education that was different from what was happening before. In this investigation, when the first computer entered the education in Mexico, from the beginning, the mixed modality was promoted, included face-to-face activities and virtual activities. We had to take some packages. We had to deliver packages to students that were far away. So teachers had to study on their own
Después, en vacaciones o
with those little packages. And then once a week, they could go to the regional center to summarize, experiment, and just being with other teachers. During the 90s, the video call was promoted that made our perception more evident of attending face-to-face reality. Our physical reality and the mental reality were being extended towards what was considered as face-to-face, towards the virtual. This was a huge step for technology and industry, for the 4.0 industry. Education, the concept of education started being redefined, and this has been accelerated with the COVID pandemic, and it was transformed, and it will transform the way of produce, of work, of relating, of collaborating, creating, investigating, and innovating, and that will imply profound modifications for society and for humans. Fortunately, education will be present. It will always be present. And teachers will also be present. The jump that we have made during this pandemic has moved forward educational processes that integrate digital technology and that see its potential as educational tools and in the development of education for society, and new methodologies of teaching being supported by new technologies in the Revolution 4.0, like work with the cloud, augmented reality, text recognition, intelligent systems, learning, simulation and integration of sensors, robots, interconnectivity, digital manufacture, and a lot. Pandemic in Mexico in the beginning, we are now going to talk about the challenges with the pandemic in Mexico. We started doing synergies between institutions to learn. So before, I had some concerns that teachers that worked in diverse contexts could know and experience with online classes. I offered an introductory course for teachers in all levels on this topic. Also, a course on the support for communities for a preschool, primary, and indigenous in Chiapas State in Mexico. This experience with the work and observation and follow-up on different groups and different associations has allowed me to identify the state of technology and specifically technology for education before the pandemic. Before pandemic, with the National Association of Universities, Red and the University Corporation for the Development of Internet. They did diagnostics that were comparable with ones in other countries in Iberoamerica. From the beginning of the pandemic, they started doing contingency plans for institutions, mainly universities. So these contingency plans could work with the emergencies, the health emergencies or disasters for natural phenomena. And that gave way to a lot of conferences, panels, and activities. They also did a poll to gather data for the contingency plans. This was marvelous because we worked a lot with this. So it was important for us to jump towards being consumers of information to be producers of information. Now, so everyone's writing books and webinars. There's a lot of information out there. In regards to teacher training programs, we found in Mexico that when the pandemic started, there was a percentage of 20% that didn't have teacher training programs in the use of technology. Other institutions like the Yucatan University since 2013 had mixed or hybrid courses with experimental activities that were face-to-face and an independent online study. So they had a platform and most of the courses, a big amount of courses with the methodology in its educational model of training, integral training. So this university formulated an educational model, and from there, it started seeing how that model could be started for it to be a current model and not a model for last century. So education has been important for the pandemic. The only connection possible between the school community was with information technology and communication. We can also see that there have been experimentations with diverse learning modalities. It was a need for using the technologies, virtual technologies, and it was needed to extend naturally the face-to-face physical contact towards the mental and the virtual. So this means that we have to understand that we are facing a unique reality, and in that unique reality, and sometimes we can be present physically, but at another time we grab our phones and we talk and we are in a video call. and we are in that reality. That reality is extended towards our site and other spaces that we couldn't have before, because the technology that we had at that moment didn't allow us to discover them. So now is the moment to think again about the teacher training. So teacher training today has a need to be updated with the specific characteristics that digital culture gives it. It also requires to innovate and enrich the experience, and to change whatever comes from last century, and gives us the safety of working in learning environments that apply their own technologies of this time. So here we're working so that the teacher can work as a mentor, as guidance, as someone that gives enthusiasm and creates enriched learning environment. It's also very necessary to expand the classroom towards its online support and to build communities that have virtual environments and where we can interact and share experiences. We also need to update the code and our competences in regards to informatic content, like reading, processing of information, autonomy, etc. We can't fall in inequality, not only economical, but mental.
Es necesario impactar en la cultura digital del pueblo para expandir las capacidades trascendentes.
In digital culture, this gives great impact, not only in institutionalized education, but for all people. It's very important that if we have a computer in a classroom and there wasn't access to the computer for the general population, it was very difficult for it to be understood as a support for the needs that the classroom had, not only the school, but life in general. It's desirable that digital culture for teaching in the 21st century, within the framework of these things that we couldn't preview, like the pandemic or situations that are given by natural phenomena and disasters that can happen it's necessary that we have a teaching that can impact digital culture for everyone. So as a diagnostic, from the experience in my country, the participation in diverse groups and report consults, we have made the following observations during the pandemic. You have talked about this, but first, great chasms were opened within the possibility of arriving towards integral education in all ways, mental health wise. In regards to the educational actors, the possibilities were limited of satisfying basic needs of survival, expression, and connection. Also, as an educator, teachers had to bring technical support. People were always saying, "Oh, I can't log in, I can't hear." So they had to bring tech support without being ready for it. And They were also not ready pedagogically to identify new strategies of learning and to modify them. Students, supposedly, in every level, were prepared for autonomous, flexible learning. It was supposed that they had the basic technological management because they were digital natives and they were supposed to have a family support. Well, is not true. You can't attend to the health of a great number of the actors and the institutionalized education that had to be home within a closed environments, unfriendly environments. So it was limited expression. Social, emotional expression was affected. Some teachers and students had a lot of emotional crises and depressive crises. In regards to learning methodology within the marginalized groups, possibilities were limited of generating deep learning because they didn't have connectivity or opportunities of training. There was also a lack of understanding to transit, to travel fluidly from the physical to the virtual, with great possibilities of being fixed in one of the two extremes. There were profound asymmetries in the educational proposal. Ways of teaching that were used in the traditional classroom were used in the virtual classroom. So that demonstrated to be a lot, very unflexible, unchangeable. They thought it would be easy to just put what they did face to face, put it online. They didn't realize that there were other possibilities that could enrich knowledge. Bureaucratic things were also had trouble with that because they didn't have the forbearance to change towards that kind of thing. Thank you very much.
Gracias, Yolanda Campos. Vamos entonces
Thank you, Yolanda.
articular la parte más propositiva, o sea, la parte, luego del análisis de cada uno de los expertos, de la puesta como en foco desde su lugar.
The analysis of each of the experts.
Una ronda de la propuesta o de
There is a round
puntos para reflexionar en
for
un
reflection
perspectivo. Así
aspect.
que luego de terminado esto, que son 5 minutos, o sea que es algo muy breve.
So this will only be very brief, 5 minutes, and we can generate an exchange between the panelists and maybe discuss.
Y aquí en sala también. Así que si les parece, seguimos en el orden en el que estábamos.
So let's continue in the order that we were working. Javier.
La presentación de cada uno como para focalizar en estos 5 minutos la parte más propositiva. Adelante.
Sí, yo por mi parte, bueno,
so for my part, I can renew a proposal that we need to face the pandemics. We need to create teaching public networks, virtual public networks, because we have determined that this infrastructure wasn't created, at least in Spain. It's something that didn't exist, not even so we had the connection, the capacity to connect. There was an interconnectivity between the university, but there wasn't an infrastructure for teaching, for teachers, or previous experience to use semantic networks for education. They were used for research. So this would work perfectly well, scientific and humanistic research using semantic networks, but it hadn't been used in teaching, with the exception of some brief exceptions.
Es decir, que la docencia presencial había primado, vamos, clarísimamente, y entonces ahora, fíjate que aparte de tener aulas, aulas
now, besides from having classrooms, we also need semantic networks and people, experts, teachers that can teach in these networks, and not only in the actual classrooms in the building. So that is one of the main challenges. And secondly, private people are the ones that have been dealing with this network. So we've all used Google Meet, for instance, and this is major corporations, and they are the ones that have created the ones that have offered their services to colleges, but also to primary and secondary education, that didn't have this infrastructure for networking. And so, so this is all happening through the phone devices, networking, and private corporations, like this one that we're using, Zoom. It's a private corporation. The same happens for Google Meet and other private corporations. All of the data generated during this process has become the property of private enterprises, and that is very alarming. There has been a huge privatization of these companies, and the value of these companies has hugely increased. And I'm talking about Facebook, Google, Apple, Amazon, also Zoom. They've gone up, their stock has gone up 40, 50% and more. And they are the ones that have provided the networking services during this pandemic, because the government had not foreseen this. There are exceptions. Uruguay is an exception. It did have an infrastructure that has worked, but for the most part, there's a lot to be done. And so the challenge here is
pero con gestión pública, con una gestión democrática, con una gestión controlada por los poderes democráticos y no por el contrario,
and on the contrary,
por grandes consejos de administración de grandes.
It needs to be dealt with by the public administration and not the private enterprise.
A través del flujo de datos en los procesos educativos se ha encontrado
This educational process, this needs to be taken into account.
Gracias, Javier. Seguimos.
Thank you, Javier.
Marta Mena, adelante. Aquí queda
Marta Mena, go ahead.
De Javier para esta parte propositiva.
¿La podemos retirar?
Sí,
esa parte?
está la tuya.
Ok, gracias.
La está viendo, ¿no?
Gracias, sí. Es demasiado extendida la presentación, sí. Bien,
So,
ha sido una experiencia interesante.
It's been a very interesting experience to listen to my colleagues make the presentations. We've seen
absolutamente distintas perspectivas,
very different viewpoints from different contexts and different expertise levels. This has been very enriching, because to see other perspectives helps us to review one's own conclusions, right? Or the analysis that we are constructing through this pandemic labyrinth. And this really greatly helps to generate new visions new viewpoints that will help us uh, to effectively build um, future visions. I've always maintained that the future is not created, it's not written, it's not set in stone. It is something that needs to be construed and in a collaborative manner. So, from the institutions, from the individual perspective, all of us, most of us, need to make our part in that creating of the future. Otherwise, fantasy spaces are generated. You expect for a future um, that is impossible for the reality that we live every day. Or you imagine a future because you lived some other experience that doesn't have a hold on reality. Um, Now,
siempre viene la pregunta, es decir,
when we think about these things, we think about how do we build a future?
cada uno desde el lugar que le
Each person from their own place.
Pero bueno, en principio como docentes, por ejemplo, si uno se sitúa en esta situación
As a teacher, if you think as a teacher, what needs to be done in the first place is to have a very good knowledge of the context in which you are working. That context diagnosis needs to be done so that we can have a vision that is more exact, more precise, more exact, because we have all seen the development of plans for actually inexistent realities that are built based on what you've heard from other colleagues, based on what you've studied, but that do not have a point of reality with what is actually needed in the true context. And this has happened a lot in the pandemic, that plans have not been able to attend actual, real situations. They had not imagined the student working from home, physically from home. So this is a widely different context. Um, where the context for the student is totally different. The interrelationship with other students, connectivity is very weakened, and there are many other challenges, familiar challenges, for instance, that the students needed to face. Um, when there is a lack of technology, when there is a problem with the coordination of hours. So when you design a politics for the future, we're all thinking about when this is over, well, virtuality will have its place. Evidently, we will move forward towards hybrid systems. How will they work? In which context? With which terms? Under which terms? And we need to think about this in order to be able to design for the future. This is the first thing that needs to be done. But then we will need to revise the practical aspects, these pedagogical practices, this way of thinking about teaching, how we learn, how we teach. This really merits a wider and collective work from the teachers of each institution, from the groups of each institution, and they need to be contextualized and they need to take into consideration the goals and the context, the actual aspect of the context. Um, so these two things are very, very important. From my perspective, you need to have a compromise with the context you're living, with the institution, with the context of the institution at every moment. And for this, we need to share information. But besides from these two basic aspects, one needs to ask many other things. For instance, what are we actually teaching? Because this has been harshly questioned during the pandemic? Are we going to teach in this context the same content that we used to teach face to face? Is it the same? Should we do that? Should we redesign or should we teach this crowded curriculum syllabus with absolute no links to the major problems that humanity is facing today? So what are we teaching? What is the major problem today? It's poverty, marginality, inequality, gender problems, gender issues. There are many, many issues that this society is facing that they need to be considered. It's not possible that we continue to teach content on whichever subject we teach that have no issues with the major problems that we're facing. So we, at the university level, we are teaching professionals that when they leave, when they graduate, they will need to take a part in the solution of this problem. But we're only teaching them theories, and they will not have the tools that they need to do this when they graduate. So we do need to teach the content, but also with a focus on the solving of the major problems that we face. So the future is constructed also in this way, with the compromise to the context we're living, with the planet, and it needs to be a joint work with a research foundation that gives us actual information on reality, on our context, and well, there's a lot more to say, but I don't want to extend. Thank you.
Thank you, Marta. Oscar Pedrozo.
Bien, realmente es un placer estar
It's an honor to be here learning and sharing from these places is that we build together, especially when we have visions that are different realities in different countries, and we can share common problems and alternate solutions. Most relevant aspects to define where we're going to, or where we should be going. One of the aspects is the collaboration from a professional point of view, the teacher working with other teachers, and the teacher giving information to other teachers, whether they know them or not. So we can build, those are the characteristics from which we build, because we know what was being done and what we do is known, and from that place we get feedback. So that's where we feel that when they give us feedback, the teaching of our work, we can make sure that it's going properly or not. We don't work from individual aspects, but from the collaboration. Another aspect that this situation has generated is to think about the links with the other person. That could be the teacher, the student, or the family. The links in its higher dimension of identification and changing, and the personalization aspect as well. A lot of times in the educational institutions, we work with a lot of students, which we don't identify with. So this way of work that the virtuality has brought should not lose the human aspect that's there in the face-to-face attendance, but it's possible to work and teach and learn from the personal and from the bond and the personal bond between teacher and student. That has driven us to think about the need of working not from a separated content, subjects and places where each of us enter a classroom and from that place we're teaching, but in the need for interdisciplinarity, thought of as from teaching and from learning as well. So the contents, yes, think about the contents, but within a framework of problems, within projects, within the competences we acquire, thought of as a whole. So that takes teachers to work collaboratively and to think about their proposal, and also for the students to be able to build those ways of seeing things, not by isolating the concept, but by bonding, and a concept that needs other content and other concepts to acquire several competences. And in that trip, we're going with others. The educational institution as attendance face-to-face, but the challenge is to think about the educational institution beyond that. The educational center as a teaching and learning intervention, but not as a fixed place, but that place is outside. So that also allows us to think of students from all over the place and to think of ourselves as teachers from all over the place. I don't choose a particular school, but I can choose a group of students that carry out a proposal, a specific proposal, independently from where they are physically. Also, the teacher can be teaching from other places. And finally, as a closing, to look for all these aspects of articulations, particularities, permanence, continuities, and trajectories. Because the objective that we have as an educational system is the learning of students, for students to learn. So to achieve those learnings, we have to achieve that these articulations are achieved. These articulations identify several places and are contextualized. They identify the particularities, but make sure that the student remains and gives its trajectory continuity. It's a great difficulty we have in Uruguay is middle education. In middle education, a lot of times we don't have that permanence and that continuity. With that, these are opportunities that we should rescue, and we need to make sure that they have permanence and give the student the trajectory and the permanence in that trajectory, and give them a guarantees to remain in the system, wherever we are. Thank you, Oscar. Yolanda, please go ahead with your closing. I would like to propose, there's from a great need, there's a need to promote the integral education for the human development, and that should make better the development of humans It's indispensable to reduce chasms, to reduce poverty, whether it's feeding or health poverty, identify the processes of education and learning happen in any modality and at any time with a good design and didactic development. The digital technology, specifically those from the 4.0 industrial revolution, can favor education. It's we really need to have continuity plans through epidemics or catastrophes and other things that we didn't think about. It's necessary to identify opportunities for the collaboration. So we agree with this. This collaboration has to happen in significant projects. Means a link between institutions and societies and companies, national and international. It's also needed to intensify the production of open educational recourses. Those need to be updated to make an optimization of the information. We should continue to train teachers as producers of knowledge that is relevant for science, technology, engineering, the artistical, the mathematical, and as human development. We really need to make plans, study plans for new opportunities related to new training requirements in the long run and in the short run. It's also needed to promote the appropriation of digital culture in the family, society, and in general culture. But these proposals and a lot of others that we have in different spaces are there, stay there in speaking.
Pasar del discurso a la acción. Es indispensable.
Why I say that what we need to do is to be responsible towards ourselves, towards others, and society in general, and environment in general. My first question can be how to stimulate the individual conscious state and collective for a transformative action that can contribute to well-being of the person and the society in general. I don't have an answer yet, but the science is looking for it. I also need that we have to go from the model we have today in education to a new one. There's an educational process that we need to make, and philosophical as well, that establishes line for the academical, the technological. Let's ask ourselves, what are we doing within that context, and how we can participate in that in the post-pandemic educational model. That educational model is a new model that evolves within the educational models that we have seen throughout history. We also need to go from the planning of investigation and education that has a traditional outlook. We need to go to a more general and interactive paradigm. And we need to see the social impact. So what's our role in narrative and in knowledge and in feelings and in values? How do we live through it as teachers or as investigators of the impact that this has? In regards to learning models, like Javier said, we should go to open tools that are built with collaboration and that they allow the growth of knowledge that can be recuperated in a social practice that simulates collective creation at any time and at any place. So which platforms, which open platforms do we have in investigation, and what we have to do to set them in motion? It's also necessary to go from the evaluation criteria as a evaluation, as a qualification, to a more regulating evaluation. What's our role in evaluation, and how to do it to guide significant knowledge and not to marginalize people? How to think about, in this 21st century, other than the health challenges, economical challenges, informational challenges that we have, education, culture, and technology in the world will suffer radical changes promoted by not only the industrial revolutions that are coming, but by the human consciousness and its consistencies with other intelligences will make a very qualitative jump. Are we ready for it? Are we ready for a possible destruction of our species? So what are we doing about it? It's also necessary to consider education as the pandemic as a global phenomenon that also affects personal consciousness and the collective consciousness. So the actions that we have to take have to adapt to the specific conditions. They also have to be followed up in the world. So it has to be a global crusade for education. That's what I imagine, and that will get me really excited. It's also necessary to think that if we can't see the future, but there's possible futures that the institutions will follow during the pandemic, and each institution will review. There's some that will try to go back to the previous methods. Others, institutions, will want to evolve and adapt to the new normal. But some institutions want to innovate and transform. So I would invite those networks to consider those networks, look for innovations that transform in such a way that the human can express more, communicate more, and always give their best and evolve in its consciousness. So how will our institutions move forward? By establishing methods and evolving and innovating. That's the question.
Gracias, Yolanda, por este.
Thank you, Yolanda. This is where interpreting ends. We're going to ask the four speakers. There's a lot to say, so that's why this is long. You can
los otros tres, ¿verdad? Y después haríamos una breve lectura de